Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I'm taking a viewer suggestion and ranking my top 15 clues from Agatha Christie novels. And I think this is a brilliant idea. Christie has so many good clues in her works that often make or break her novels. And to start off with some parameters I set for myself, I decided to only use specific clues from novels instead of broader meta clues. For instance, Christie often uses like costumes and laundry lists across many of her works, but I decided that I would be more specific and use specific lists or specific costumes and whatnot. There are also some instances where I combine two clues into one if they work in tandem, and the final parameter is that I decided only to use actual clues that either the detective or the reader can use to solve the murder. Sometimes we have information that's not really a clue, but may influence how the reader looks at certain characters or certain situations. And no meta clues either, such as, Christie always uses love triangles or whatever. And obviously, there will be spoilers ahead. It's unavoidable in this kind of list. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. But first, I have some honorable mentions that I'll go over in chronological order. The first is the very first Christie clue from the mysterious affair at Styles with the fireplace that was lit on the hottest night of the year, indicating that something had been burned. And from Hercule Poirot's Christmas, I have the rubber wisp and wooden peg that are actually faked, but similar to the actual ones that were used during the crime. And the fun of this comes from more from other factors than the items themselves, where the superintendent doesn't tell Poirot about them, which is really the clue and not the actual items themselves. And then there were none, I considered the stolen wool and the shower curtain, whose absence we were alerted to very early on, which should be a clue that something in addition was going on with them before they actually appeared. This one almost made the list. It's essentially number 16, but from Crooked House, we're going with the many features of a killer possesses, and there's only one character who fits them all in this book. Two honorable mentions from Dead Man's Folly are the folly itself being in an odd location, and the double meaning of the word folly, and also the fatal line, there'll always be folly at St. Nass House, being a favorite word clue of mine, but there are many other ones I found to just be slightly better. And the last honorable mention comes from the clocks over Mrs. Bland somehow being the sole heiress, yet also having a sister, which I thought this was a neat little trick, but I didn't include it because I don't think it's that subtle or as satisfying as many of the other clues that did make the list. Starting at number 15, and honestly, I expanded the list from 10 to 15 because I just simply couldn't cut my original short list of 14 down to 10. So I added this one, and at number 15, it comes from Evil Under the Sun, and that's the bathtub. And we can combine this with the broken suntan lotion bottle. And this is a classic Christie trick where there's nothing odd about either the bath or the bottle specifically, but what is interesting is that no one admits to taking the bath, so it has to mean something. So the reader needs to do quite a bit of deduction here to figure out that someone washed off suntan coloring off of their skin at some point and has to figure out why. It's the kind of clue that I enjoy because it is workable, but the reader is never really going to get there, so I put it at number 15. Number 14 is an example of a good in your face type of clue, and that is the bouquet of wax flowers from After the Funeral, one of two clues from that book that made the list. And what I love about this clue is that it's hidden in plain sight. Miss Gilchrist mentions the green malachite table looked better with the wax flowers on them, but the wax flowers broke and were put away. Moreover, this was supposed to be Miss Gilchrist's first visit to Enderby Hall, so she should never have seen them before. And this is a very small clue. It happens in just one line, but when you get it, everything else falls to place. It's a very well hidden clue, hidden in plain sight. At number 13 is a specific example of the too many clues clue, and it comes from Murder on the Orient Express. Just to name a few of these many clues, we have the handkerchief, the letter H on it, the grease on the passport, the conductor's button, the red kimono, and the pipe cleaners. All of these clues indicate many specific people and are found all over the train, including in Poirot's luggage. And what we're supposed to deduce from this is that when there are too many clues, we should just simply ignore all of them. And Christie does this in other books, but I think she does it best in Murder on the Orient Express, which is why I put this example on the list. Typically, too many clues cover up and distract from a very simple crime, which is what we have here in this classic novel. Clue number 12 comes oddly from a novel that I think is a very flawed murder plot, but this is a very good clue and is the torn label from Sad Cypress. And Poirot discovers a label from a bottle that reads morphine, but in this case, the M is lowercase. It had been assumed that this vial contained the morphine Eleanor poisoned Mary and Aunt Laura with, but Poirot deduces that the vial held something else like apomorphine. If it held morphine, the M would have been capitalized. And this is another two-step clue. Apomorphine induces vomiting, so the reader and Poirot have to figure out why someone would induce vomiting and who at some point appeared to have vomited. Well, perhaps this person knowingly consumed morphine poisoning and vomited up to prevent dying. And the torn label is truly an ingenious clue that points directly at the killer if you can interpret it correctly. At number 11 is one that it's a borderline clue. It's not a clue that directly incriminates someone, but it is a fun one nonetheless, and that is the dashingly handsome good looks of Superintendent Sugden from Hercule Poirot's Christmas. I love this clue for many reasons. First off, it's disguised as something of a humorous romance between Sugden and Pilar, and thus unrelated to the murder. Second, it gives characterization to the inspector character who is typically ignored for the course of the novel, and that is really our first hint that this inspector is more important than the inspectors normally are. And Sugden's good looks are mentioned many times, most importantly when Pilar finds out that her grandfather must have looked similar to Sugden when he was younger. And this also doubles as an in your face clue, as Christie really pushes this point so many times. And it's the type of clue you face palm once it's explained to you, and you didn't see it coming. At number 10, I have the other clue from After the Funeral, and that is Cora's painting, or more accurately, it's Miss Gilchrist's painting. Miss Gilchrist said that Cora always painted from real life, but then Susan says that she couldn't possibly have made this one particular painting of a pier because the pier was blown up during the war, and she later finds an identical postcard. And this is a perfect clue for a few reasons. It squarely indicates Miss Gilchrist because she's the only suspect who had access to this painting. Secondly, it doubles as characterization for Cora Lansquenet because the reader already finds her kind of weird and something of a lunatic, and this just fits in perfectly that she would lie about painting from life. Of course, this isn't actually a lie, but it is a good piece of obfuscation. And it's the kind of clue the reader picks up on, but easily forgets about, or can't interpret correctly, or think it might be nothing, which always leads to a fun time, in my opinion. At number 9 is the first of two clues from And Then There Were None that did make the list, and that is the gramophone recording. And this is another good one because it serves multiple purposes. It establishes the atmosphere of Soldier Island, it introduces the readers to the characters' backstories and misdeeds, and it ignites the action. But it also cleverly provides a clue. The way the voice on the gramophone lists off everyone's crimes is very reminiscent of a judicial proceeding indicating that Justice Wargrave, a judge, is behind all of this. There's also another clue built in here, at least according to Wargrave, that his alleged crime isn't actually a crime and all the others are, so that makes him innocent, which in turn means he's the most logical person to be guilty of the murders on the island, which I have to admit I'm a little iffy on. I think Wargrave is a very conceited individual, and I wouldn't trust anything he says, even in his confession. And I have my own doubts that Wargrave was even innocent of this crime like he says he is, but this is a multifaceted clue that is easy to overlook and is a very strong one as well. Number 8, I have one of two clues from A Murder is Announced, and that is Miss Murgatroyd's line of "She wasn't there." Like so many great clues, this is one that is so simple to decipher, yet the reader is totally unlikely to get there. And the emphasis of her words is either on the she or the there, which is really a point of contention for Miss Marple, and it has to be on the there because there are too many women at the holdup for Miss Murgatroyd to be talking about a specific woman, and she wasn't talking about a specific person beforehand anyway. So the emphasis is on there, which means Miss Murgatroyd had a specific place in mind, and that location can only be where Miss Blacklock was supposed to be standing when the lights went out. It is quite a lot of work to get there, but it isn't really that difficult, yet totally unlikely to happen, and it's a very key clue at that that exposes the whole scheme at hand. At number 7 is another clue from a novel that has two entries on the list, and that is Caroline Crail wiping the fingerprints off of the beer bottle in Five Little Pigs. And this clue is genius, in my opinion. It's a good red herring because when we first hear Miss Williams tell this story, the obvious implication is that Caroline is guilty in wiping off her own fingerprints. But when you really, really think about it, she can't be doing that. It doesn't make any sense. Everyone saw her handle the bottle, so she couldn't be covering up this act. Moreover, the poison that killed Amyas was never in the beer bottle, and Caroline didn't know that. So, what we can deduce here is that Caroline not only did not know how Amyas was killed for the first time, this proves her innocence. And not only that, Caroline is covering up for someone else. It's the type of clue that is so easily misinterpreted that breaks open the case when you finally get it right. Number 6, and this is sort of multiple clues that I bundled into one because they work in tandem, and that is the state of the body in the library. And I'm talking about the titular body, the one that is Pamela Reeves, that we are led to believe is Ruby Keene. We're given so many details about this body, and this is unusual unto itself because Christie typically doesn't go there. But the description of the body is so obviously not Ruby Keene, despite what we're told, and what I love about this is that it's another in your face clue. We were told so many times about the nails being bitten, even though Ruby clipped her nails. We're told about the body's teeth sticking out when Ruby's teeth ran down her throat. We're told the body is a virgin when Ruby is very clearly not. And time again, we were given descriptions of the corpse that simply do not match up with Ruby Keene. It's really very obvious once we're told everything and we have the ability to reflect back. At number 5 is the other clue from And Then There Were None, and that is the invitation letters. And what I like about this one is you really have to think about it. This clue is not explained at the end of the novel or really analyzed that much during the course of the novel, but the book begins with each of the guests, minus the Rogerses, reading or thinking about their invitation letter to Soldier Island. All of them are signed by either UN Owen or some derivative of that, except for Justice Wargraves, whose is signed by Constance Comington, a friend of his. And what this indicates is that Wargrave can summon himself to the island using the name of a real person because he is the culprit and isn't going to check up on Mrs. Comington, whereas he has to use fake names to lure everyone else to the island because there is a chance they may look into things and realize something is up. And this is a very risky thing for Wargrave to do. He could have just signed his own letter, UN Owen, but then again, when you think about it, he can't do that because that would raise questions later on about how he was the one to solve the puzzle over UN Owen, standing for unknown, and like why would he go to the island if he had figured that out? And what I love about this clue is that it happens on the very first page of the novel. It's so easily forgettable, and it stands out if and only if you remember it. Clue number 4 is the other clue from Five Little Pigs, and that is Amyas's line that everything tastes foul today. And this is such a simple clue, and it's one that I picked up on during my initial read of this book many years ago, and naturally I failed to see its implication. When Amyas drinks that last beer, he declares that it tastes funny, and says that everything tastes foul today. The obvious implication is that he had something else earlier in the day that also tasted foul. And I realized this, but I failed to make the connection that he was poisoned earlier in the day and not when Carolyn brought him that final beer. And this revelation puts a lot in perspective that Carolyn's continued worry over that final beer also indicated that she didn't know what happened, and also that her covering up for Angela was also unnecessary. When I first read this book, I fell into Christie's trap. I thought Carolyn was covering for Angela, but this clue of everything tastes foul today also clears Angela and leaves one of the other four pigs as the only possible culprit. At number 3 is the other clue from A Murder is Announced, and another one that I took notice of and failed to see it, and that is Bunny's constant calling of Letitia Blacklock Lottie instead of Letty. And I love this clue because it plays into the character of Bunny and her scatterbrained nature while also revealing the truth about Miss Blacklock's identity of her really being Charlotte and not Letitia. And this is another really bold clue, and I think it actually improves with time. Now, I've read Christie in physical copy, so when I saw this, I knew it was a clue because a physical copy just isn't going to have the typos it does. But nowadays, with the shift toward digital media, when books are digitalized, there are often a lot of typos, especially the turning of E's into O's and vice versa. So I actually think this clue becomes more effective with new technology. And as a side note, and this didn't factor into my placing of this one at number three, there are clearly some editions where editors may have thought this was a typo. I have an edition where Bunny calls Miss Blacklock Lottie only one time instead of the multiple times it's supposed to happen. And it happens in the cafe scene, but during Miss Marple's summation gathering, she mentions this happening in front of the inspector, which does not happen in my edition. So this clue can be a bit wonky, but I'm only assessing on the way Christie wrote it, which I find just absolutely genius. Number two, and these top are the only entries from their books, and this one might be a bit controversial because I know this clue is not liked by some fans, and that is the bridge scores from Cards on the Table. And I understand readers not liking this one if they don't know bridge, but everything I know about bridge comes from my reading of this book, and everything the reader needs to know is explained clearly within the text. And what I like about this one is that it is both a physical clue and a psychological one. When Poirot studies the bridge scores, he learns Major Despard was never dummy, and thus could never have stabbed Mr. Chaitana because he never left the table. But more fascinating to me is how Poirot interprets the playing style of each character and matches it to their personality to see who would have committed the murder. Mrs. Lorimer is too calculated, and Anne Meredith is too chaotic, but Dr. Roberts takes risks, and to stab Chaitana in a room full of the other people is risky. It works so well and means this case is actually solvable from much earlier on in the book, but it is unlikely that the reader will actually get there. And at number one, the best clue in an Agatha Christie novel is actually the very same clue the person who suggested this video brought up, and that is Nick's letters from Peril at End House. And I'm combining this clue with another one regarding Nick and Maggie's real name since they work together. There are so many factors in those letters. The first being that they were all addressed to Magdala, which is Nick and Maggie's real name, but neither of them actually goes by that. And the second is that they are general love letters. There's nothing in them that is overly personal or identifies the receiver other than the address name. And third, and this is my favorite, it's not what the letters say, it's what they don't say. There's no mention of the major surgery Nick had during the course of those letters, and what this all means is that those letters are not Nick's, they're Maggie's, whose real name is also Magdala. None of the letters address the receiver as Nick, which is very strange because that's all she's ever called by her friends. Everyone calls her Nick, so to call her Magdala is something of a red flag. And this is the kind of clue that exposes everything. You need nothing else. It all fits into place if you can figure out these letters, which the reader is probably not likely to do. And that's it for this video. And I did arrange these in a ranking, but truth be told, it doesn't really matter. I think all of these clues were just spectacular, and there are so many other fantastic ones that I didn't even mention. If you have any video ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. And next week, I will begin my largest ranking to date. I will be ranking 100 Agatha Christie murderers, accomplices, and the likes. And I will get into my criteria for that next week, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.